Hey everyone, what's going on? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Chof Tes of Masechta Pesachim, Daf 29. Interesting daf today. Why is it interesting? I don't know. But it just kind of is. The beginning of the daf, we get back to our initial discussion right after the Mishnah yesterday, which was who's the author of our Mishnah. We got kind of sidetracked in machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Yossi Aglili. We're now going to tie it back in to see who the author of our Mishnah is. Machlokas between Rav Acha bar Yaakov and Rav. And then we get into a whole 5 option way of explaining a machlokas regarding if you eat Hametz of Kodshim on of hekdesh on Pesach, are you chayav a korban me'ilah? What do you guys think? It's machlokas, right? And then finally, mixtures of chametz. Maybe you've heard of these buzz phrases like min b'mino, min b'she'eno mino, no saint tam. So we're going to get into these inyanim at the end. Let us begin all the way at the bottom of the Chav Ches Amud Beis, Mani Mas Nisan. Who is the author of our Mishnah? So who could remind me what our Mishnah said? Our Mishnah said that Chametz she'avar olav Pesach. If you have Chametz that was around during Pesach and now it's after Pesach, can you get benefit from that Chametz? So the Mishnah had said, well, it depends. Who was the owner of the Chametz on Pesach? If it belonged to a Nachri, to a non-Jew, you're allowed to get benefit. If it belonged to a Jew, you may not get benefit. The question is, who is the author of our Mishnah? Who said that? So now, we have the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that there's an isser of eating chametz and getting benefit from chametz before Pesach begins, during Pesach, as well as chametz she'avar olav Pesach. Now, he doesn't make a distinction between if that chametz belonged to a Jew or a non-Jew. And therefore, if the author of our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, well then, why would it be permissible to get benefit from the chametz of a non-Jew after Pesach? He says that you can't get benefit from any chametz she'avar olav Pesach. So that's why we can't say that it's Rabbi Yehuda. Now, if it's Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shimon said that the isser of eating matzah, of eating chametz, is only on Pesach. Before and after Pesach, it's permitted. In which case, you can even get benefit from the chametz of a yid after Pesach. And Rabbi Yossi Aglili, he says you're allowed to get benefit from chametz of a yid even on Pesach. So, who is it? So, Rabbi Yehuda, chametz tama ka'amar. Afilu denachri. If it's Rabbi Yehuda, so he said the chametz she'avar olav Pesach is asur, even if it belongs to a non-Jew. V'i Rabbi Yehuda diso nami misho kashari. Did I say Rabbi Yehuda? V'i Rabbi Shimon, if it's Rabbi Shimon, diso nami misho kashari. And if we're talking about Rabbi Shimon, who says that the isser of eating and getting benefit from chametz is only on Pesach, but before and after it's permitted, well then you're even allowed to get benefit from the chametz of a yid after Pesach. So v'i Rabbi Yossi Aglili, and if it's Rabbi Yossi Aglili, forget about it. Hafilu tochs manu nami misho kashari ba'ano. According to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, you're even allowed to get benefit from the chametz of a yid on Pesach, so certainly after Pesach. So Rav Acha bar Yaakov l'olam Rabbi Yehuda he. Aha. Says Rav Acha bar Yaakov that really the author of our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. Okay. What about the fact that our Mishnah says that you're permitted to get benefit from the chametz of a non-Jew after Pesach? Listen to this. V'yalev so'or da'achila mis'or d're'iyah. Aha. Do you guys remember so'or d're'iyah? What's so'or d're'iyah? Of course you remember. It's all over the show. Ba'yira ba'yimatze. Right? It says le'yira lecha chametz v'le'yira lecha so'or. So it says to you, and of course, who could tell me what's the drasha? Very good. Shelcha yatarah aval atarah shel acherim mishagavo. You're not allowed to see your chametz, but you can see the chametz of other people. You can see the chametz of hekdesh. So, how does that tie in? Oh, so we're saying that we learn out achila from re'iyah. That just like re'iyah, it's your chametz that you're not allowed to see, but you can see other people's chametz. So the same thing applies to eating. Now listen to this, it's a big hekdesh. Rav Acha bar Yaakov wants to argue that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the issue with eating chametz on Pesach and karis and all that stuff is your chametz. But somebody else's chametz would be okay to eat. So you can eat the chametz of a non-Jew on Pesach, according to Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Acha bar Yaakov's explanation, which we'll see he actually retracted from. But for now, this is his explanation, and therefore, you're even allowed to eat the chametz of a non-Jew on Pesach, and certainly after Pesach. So there you go. So Rav Acha bar Yaakov says, Rav Acha bar Yaakov l'olam Rabbi Yehuda, he, really our Mishnah is, the author is Rabbi Yehuda, v'yalav seor da'achidim seor d're'iyah, and he learns out the seor of eating chametz from the seor of seeing chametz. Kilu, the isser of eating chametz from the isser of seeing chametz, ma seor d're'iyah. Just like when it comes to seeing chametz, it's shalcha yataroy. You're not allowed to see your own chametz, but you're allowed to see the chametz of other people, or if it's hekdesh. Also, when it comes to the chametz, eating chametz, don't eat your own chametz, but you're permitted to eat the chametz of other people and of hekdesh, and therefore the chametz of the non-Jew, according to Rav Acha bar Yaakov, he says that Rabbi Yehuda would say that even on Pesach you would be allowed to benefit and eat the chametz of a non-Jew. So, and certainly after Pesach it's permitted. Really, the Mishnah could have said that you can even eat the chametz of a non-Jew after Pesach. But for consistency, since the Mishnah had to say that if the chametz of a Pesach belonged to a Jew, so then it's also ba'ana. Not only are you not allowed to eat it, but you're also not allowed to benefit from it. So it kept it in the context of hana'ah for a non-Jew as well, to say that you are permitted to benefit from the chametz of a non-Jew, sha'av olav Pesach, but really you can even eat it. And really, says Rav Acha bar Yaakov, the Mishnah could have even said, since it's Rabbi Yehuda, that you could benefit from the chametz of a non-Jew even on Pesach, and you can even eat it on Pesach. But since it was talking about a Yid after Pesach, to say that after Pesach you're not allowed to get hana from the chametz of a Yid, so it also stuck to after Pesach in the context of the Nachri as well, the non-Jew as well. But really, Meker Adin argues with Rav Acha bar Yaakov, according to Rabbi Yehuda, chametz of a non-Jew on Pesach, not only can you benefit from it, you can even take eat it. Very interesting. Rava Amar, says Rava, L'olam Reb Shimon he. Really, our Mishnah is authored by Reb Shimon. He's behind the Mishnah. That, now, what's the problem with that? The problem with that is that Reb Shimon says that the isser of eating chametz and getting benefit from chametz is only on Pesach itself. Before Pesach, after Pesach, right? Chametz over all of a Pesach is no problem. So then why is the Mishnah saying that the chametz of a Yid after Pesach is also ba'ano? Reb Shimon knaso kanis over alea b'bayira uval yimatze. You hear that? That according to Reb Shimon, even though he says that mida oraisa, there is nothing wrong with chametz over all of a Pesach, because the isser of achilas chametz is only on Pesach itself. However, after Pesach there is an isser d'Rabbanon. The rabbi said that nonetheless we don't want you eating the chametz of a Yid shavar all of a Pesach because of a knas, of a fine, because Reb Shimon, would still obviously agreed that this Yid was over on the isser of bayira bayimatze, of not having any chametz around during Pesach. So since this Yid was over on the lav of bayira bayimatze, so even after Pesach, when the lav no longer applies, still we're not going to want you consuming this chametz as a fine. So let's say you have a Yid that owns a supermarket and he never got rid of any of his chametz. So even though Reb Shimon would say that after Pesach you'd be allowed to shop in that supermarket, but as a fine, since he held on to his chametz and was over in bayira bayimatze all of Pesach, so we say do not shop at that supermarket, and that's what the Mishnah is saying. That when it says that the chametz of a Yid of all of a Pesach is also ba'ana, it's only a fine, a knas, since because in response to the fact that this Yid was over on bayira bayimatze. Bishlama the Rava, says the Gemara. Rava says, I kind of get not Rava, the Gemara, I don't know what I said. The Gemara says that I understand Rava's opinion. Aha. So I understand Rava. Because if we look at our Mishnah, what does it say? The Mishnah says that the Hametz of a Yid after Pesach is also Ba'ana, and he gives a reason for it. The Mishnah gives a reason for it. It's because of Ba'yirah. Right? It says Lo Yirah, which is Ba'yirah Ba'yimatze, which is completely in line with Rava. That's exactly what Rava says. Rava says, that the Mishnah is Reb Shimon, that Meikar Adin, really Chametz Sha'avar Alav Pesach is mutter, because there's no prohibition against Chametz after Pesach. But as a fine, as a knas, we say, do not consume this, do not get benefit from this chametz, because this yid was over on the lav of Ba'yirah Ba'yimatze, which is exactly what the Mishnah is saying. Mishum shenemer lo yirah, as it says, it should not be seen. Interesting. But according to Ravacha Bar Yaakov, who says that the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, well, if the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, then how come you're not allowed to get benefit from Hametz Sha'avar Olav Pesach if it belongs to a Yid? Well, because it's a prohibition, right? According to Rabbi Yehuda, there it says 3 times not to eat Hametz. One is before Pesach, one is during Pesach, one's after Pesach. So therefore, the reason why you are not allowed to get benefit from the Hametz Sha'avar Olav Pesach of a Yid after Pesach is not because of Lo Yirah Lecha, of Ba'yirah Ba'yimatze. No, it's because of the Isser of Achila. It's because of Lo Ye'achal Chametz. So why does it say that the reason you're not allowed to get benefit from the Chametz of a Yid is because of Lo Yirah? So misavat aseifa kai, hareisha kai. Do you think that this Lo Yirah is going on the Seifa, is explaining why you are not allowed to get benefit from the Chametz of a Yid after Pesach? No. Rethink. This pasuk of Lo Yirah is coming to explain the reisha of why you are allowed to get benefit from the Chametz of a non-Jew after Pesach. This is what it's saying. That the Chametz of a non-Jew, Sha'avar Olav Pesach, you would be allowed to get benefit from, according to Rabbi Yehuda, because the pasuk says that the chametz should not be seen to you. You're not allowed to see your chametz, but you're allowed to see the chametz of other people, of hekdesh. And we learn out achila from re'iyah, and therefore just like lo yirah lecha applies only to your chametz, therefore eating applies only to your chametz, and that is why you would be allowed to eat the chametz of a non-Jew after Pesach. Okay, fine. So that's the machlokas between Rava and Ravacha Bar Yaakov regarding who is the author of our Mishnah. Rava says the author of our Mishnah is Reb Shimon. Ravacha Bar Yaakov says the author of our Mishnah is Reb Yehuda. Vazul Tamayu. And Rava and Ravacha Bar Yaakov are consistent. Okay, how do we see this? De'itmar, as it was stated, ha'ochel se'or shel nachrish of olav Pesach. Okay, if you eat the leaven of a non-Jew, shavar olav Pesach. So the Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, so Rava Amar Loke, Ravacha Bar Yaakov Amar Einu Loke. Perfect. So when it comes to eating the leaven of a non-Jew, Sha'avar Olav Pesach, according to Rabbi Yehuda, so let's think. So according to Rava says that our Mishnah is Reb Shimon. He doesn't say anything about Rabbi Yehuda, so Pashtus and Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, therefore, is that it says don't eat chametz 3 times. One before Pesach, one during Pesach, one after Pesach. There's no distinction between a Jew and a non-Jew, and therefore, if you eat what was it saying? Yeah. Therefore, if you eat the chametz of a non-Jew after Pesach, you're going to be over on the lav, and therefore you chayiv malchus, according to Rava. Whereas according to Ravacha Bar Yaakov, he says that Rabbi Yehuda learns out eating from seeing, and therefore there's really nothing wrong with eating chametz she'avar of a Pesach of a non-Jew. Therefore, you would not be chayiv malchus. So Rav Amar Loke, lo yalef Rabbi Yehuda soy dachilim soy deriyah. So Rav says that if you eat chametz she'avar of a Pesach of a non-Jew, you get malchus according to Rabbi Yehuda, because he doesn't hold like Rav Acha bar Yaakov. He doesn't hold that we learn out achila from re'iyah, and therefore even the chametz of a non-Jew would be also after Pesach according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Acha bar Yaakov Amar Eino Loke. Rav Acha bar Yaakov says that this fellow doesn't get malchus. Yalav soy dachilim soy deriyah, because according to Rav Acha bar Yaakov explains Rabbi Yehuda that we learn out so'or achila from so'or deriyah, that it's only a problem to eat your own chametz. If you're allowed to eat other people's chametz, i.e. this chametz of a non-Jew, there's nothing wrong with eating it after Pesach according to Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore you can even eat it on Pesach. Therefore you're not going to be chayiv malchus according to Rav Acha bar Yaakov, explaining Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Okay, so now the Gemara says, V'hodar Rav Acha bar Yaakov me'ahi. Interesting. Rav Acha bar Yaakov took back his position that he had just said that according to Rabbi Yehuda, he learns out achila from re'iyah, and therefore it's only an issue of eating your own chametz, but the chametz of shalacherim, shalavo, of other people, or of hekdesh, you'd be allowed to eat even on Pesach. Rav Acha bar Yaakov, he retracted from that. And we're really only going to see that really kind of in the middle of Chof Tes Amud Beis. So we're not going to see that immediately. We're going to kind of have this discussion of what happens if you eat chametz of hekdesh on Pesach. Are you chayav in Asher Me'ilos or not? And kind of towards the end of this discussion is where we're going to see that Rav Acha bar Yaakov retracted his statement. So here we go. The Tanya is, we learn in the Brayso, Ochel chametz shel hekdesh b'moed ma'al v'yeshom lo ma'al. Here we go. So if somebody eats chametz of hekdesh on Pesach, so what does that mean? So I assume what it means is that, let's say before Pesach, you went over to some bread, and you said, "Hey, bready, I'm donating you to the Beis Hamikdash." So it's hekdesh. You then have to bring it to the Beis Hamikdash, and now it belongs to the Beis Hamikdash, and the treasurer at the Beis Hamikdash will sell it back to you, and now you can take back the bread. You give the temple some money, they use the money, you eat the bread, and that's the way it goes. But now it's Pesach. You didn't yet bring the bread to the Beis Hamikdash. So you have bread, you have chametz, it's hekdesh, and you ate it. So you can be chayiv kares, of course. You ate chametz, you chayiv kares. The question is, do you have to also bring in ashram me'ilos, a korban ashram, since you benefited from hekdesh? That's the question. So yesh, right? So ma'al. So one opinion is that yes, you have to bring an ashram me'ilos. V'yeshom lo ma'al. And there's another opinion that says no, you don't have to bring an ashram me'ilos. Man da'amar yesh omrim. What? No, man yesh omrim. Who is this yesh omrim? Who's this opinion that says that you do not need to bring an ashram me'ilos? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, says Rabbi Yochanan, Reb Nechunya ben Akana hi. Wa. It's Reb Nechunya ben Akana. Who's Reb Nechunya ben Akana? I don't really know. But I think he was a pretty early Tana, I think. But he wrote, I think, the Sefer Bahir is the tradition. Yeah, I don't know. I think I was learning with my friend yesterday. I think he said maybe he also wrote Ana B'Koach. Interesting. The Tana is learning about Reb Nechunya ben Akana, Yo'oses, Yom HaKippurim, Kishabbos, and Tashlumin. The Reb Nechunya ben Akana, he would make Yom Kippur like Shabbos regarding payments. Ma Shabbos mischayiv benafsho ufatum and tashlumin. Just like on Shabbos you're chayiv misa and therefore you're potter for paying. After Yom Kippur mischayiv benafsho ufatum and tashlumin. Therefore Yom Kippur also you are chayiv kares and therefore you are potter from payment. Meaning, let's say a fellow on Shabbos goes up to a pile of grain and he burns it. So, and it doesn't belong to him, it belongs to his friend. So the question is, okay, so he's chayiv misa, he's chayiv skila because he burnt down the pile of grain. The question is, does he also need to pay back his friend for the fact that he caused him damage? The answer is no. Because there's a concept of kamle b'derab minei that we hold him accountable for the more severe punishment. In this case, we're going to stone him. So therefore, we say, don't worry about paying back for the damages. So, and the same thing, says Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana, applies to Yom Kippur. If somebody does a malach on Yom Kippur, so he's chayiv kares, And we would say the same thing, that you don't need to be concerned about the monetary implications. And therefore, we're going to apply that here as well. And we're going to say that since you ate chametz on Pesach, and your chayiv kares for eating chametz on Pesach, don't worry about the ashram me'ilos that you have to bring for the fact that it was hekdesh. Okay? Fine. Rav Yosef, says Rav Yosef, bepodenes hakodshim lachilun leklovim kamiflege. Aha. Says Rav Yosef, the question is like this. First of all, you have to assume right now that we're talking about Rav Yosef Aglili's opinion, who says that chametz on Pesach is mutar ba'anoah. Okay, so it's fit for something, right? And therefore it's fit for something right now on Pesach, but it's hekdesh. So what are you going to do with it? So the question is, well, you can theoretically transfer the kedusha of the bread onto money, and now the money is hekdesh, and the bread is now chulin, but it's Pesach. What are you going to do with bread? Well, you can feed it to your dog. So the question is, on Pesach, can you be podeh the bread to feed it to your dog? So, and instead you ate it. So the question is, if you say, well, the bread has some kind of value, i.e., you can always just be podeh the bread, right? Transfer its kedusha onto money, and you can feed the bread to your dog. Therefore, it has value. There's something you can do with it right now. Be podeh it, feed it to your dog, and instead you ate it. So then you're going to be chayav a korban me'ilah. However, if you say that you would not be allowed on Pesach to be podeh the hekdesh, to be podeh the kodshim, in order to feed it to your dog, well then what can you do with it? It's Pesach. You can't eat it. You can't be podeh it to feed it to your dog. What are you going to do with it? Nothing. And therefore, since there's really nothing you could have done with it anyways, so it's not fit for anything, it doesn't have any value, so therefore it's not going to be considered like you got benefit by eating this thing from hekdesh, because it was pretty much valueless anyways. There's nothing you can do with it. So the machlokas here is regarding, if you are able to get benefit from chametz on Pesach, like Rabbi Yosef Aglili, would you be able to be podeh kodshim in order to then feed it to your dog? So Manda Amar Ma'al. So according to Manda Amar, who says that you have to bring an ashram me'ilos, so he holds that you would be allowed to redeem this bread onto money and then feed the bread to your dog, and therefore there was something you could have done with it. It was fit for something to feed it to your dog, and instead you ate it. So therefore you have to bring an ashram me'ilos. Manda Amar lo ma'al kosaver in poden. According to Manda Amar, who says that you don't have to bring an ashram me'ilos, it's because you're not allowed to redeem hekdesh in order to feed it to your dog, and therefore there was really nothing you could be doing with it right now in Pesach. It's valueless right now. In the future it'll have value again after Pesach, once it becomes once you can eat it again and there's value. So then meaning once you can eat chametz, you can be podeh and then eat it. So then at that point it'll be over. You'll be chayav ashram me'ilos if you eat it. But now on Pesach, when there's really nothing you can do with it, so you're not going to have to bring an ashram me'ilos. Rav Acha bar Rava Tanala La Shmaitem Shmita Rav Yosef. So Rav Acha bar Rava explained this sugya in the name of Rav Yosef b'halishna in the following way: Tuchli ama ein podim esakodshim lachilun leklovim. So he says, look, really we're not talking about being podeh kodshim lachilun leklovim. If we hold like Rabbi Yossi Haglili that chametz is mutar ba'anoah, and the question is, can you be podeh this kodshim and feed it to your dogs? He says, look, everyone agrees that you're not allowed to be podeh this kodshim to feed it to your dogs. Here, this is what we're talking about, and now we have to assume that it's like Reb Shimon, okay? That according to Reb Shimon, that after Pesach, you're allowed to get benefit from this chametz she'avar olav Pesach, and therefore after Pesach, this chametz will once again have value, and at that point, you'd be able to be podeh it and eat it and give the money to hekdesh, to the Beis Hamikdash. So it's going to have value in the future, but right now on Pesach, according to Reb Shimon, it's also b'achila, and as we learned last week, dafka when it comes to chametz, it's also b'achila and also ba'anoah. The only one who disagrees with that is Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who says it's mutar ba'anoah, but the general assumption is that chametz on Pesach is also b'achila and also ba'anoah. So right now it's Pesach. Everyone agrees that even if it was mutar ba'anoah, you wouldn't be allowed to be podeh lachilas klavim, so forget about that, right? But now we're saying that it's according to Reb Shimon. Right now it's Pesach. It's also b'achila, also ba'anoah. In the future, after Pesach, it'll be mutar b'hana'ah, it will have value, and you can be poda and give it to the Beis HaMikdash. But right now, there's nothing you can do with it. So the question is does that future value make a difference? We saw this earlier in the Masechta, this concept of davar agorim l'mamun k'mamun dami, something that right now doesn't have future, but it doesn't have value, but in the future it will have value. So does that matter? So they're arguing about something that is a cause for future value. Is that significant at the present moment? Manda Amar Ma'al. So the Manda Amar, who says that you have to bring an Asher Me'ilos. Well, because he holds that yes, something that in the future will have money, something that causes future value, is actually it's as though it has value right now, and therefore when you eat this Hametz of hekdesh, you're mamish eating something that has value, something that will in the future have value to the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore it's considered that it has value right now. Therefore you have to bring in Asher Me'ilos for having eaten that value, that hekdesh. The Manda Amar who says that you do not have to bring in Asher Me'ilos, it's because he says that something that causes future value has no significance right now. Mazel tov for the future, but the future isn't here yet, and therefore, right now when you ate this bread, there aren't really any nafka minas, and you don't have to bring in Asher Me'ilos. Now here we go. Here is really what this whole sugya is being brought for, which is to teach that Rav Acha Bar Yaakov retracted on his initial assertion that according to Rabbi Yehuda, we compare ochel to re'iyah to say that you're only not allowed to eat your ochel, to eat your chametz on Pesach, but you can eat the chametz of a non-Jew. So he retracts on that. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Amar, okay, everyone would agree that davar gam mamun is k'mamun dami and it would have value now. Fine. V'hacha b'flugta to Rabbi Yehuda v'Reb Shimon kamiflagei. Boom. And here it's pashit the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Shimon, that if you hold like Reb Shimon, that right now it's asur b'hana'ah, but in the future it's going to have value after Pesach when it's mutar b'hana'ah. So then it's davar gam mamun k'mamun dami, and you're chayiv korban me'ilos. However, if you hold like Rabbi Yehuda, that even after Pesach, chametz is still going to be asur b'hana'ah, well then, it's not going to have any value, doesn't have value now, won't have any value in the future, and therefore you're going to be pater. So we see that according to Rabbi Yehuda, even after Pesach, this chametz of hekdesh does not have any value, and it's also b'hana'ah. And if he compared achila / hana'ah to re'iyah, well then he would say that, right, shel atarah shel acherim shel gavoah, you're allowed to see the chametz of hekdesh. You're allowed to, and if you compare eating to seeing, you're allowed to eat and you're allowed to get benefit from the chametz of hekdesh. So therefore, from the fact that Rav Acha Bar Yaakov is saying that if you hold like Rabbi Yehuda, you are going to be pater from an Asher Me'ilah if you eat this chametz of hekdesh on Pesach, well, clearly then that means that Rav Acha Bar Yaakov assumes that according to Rabbi Yehuda, even after Pesach, it would still be asur b'hana'ah and not have value. So the Manda Amar lo ma'al Rabbi Yehuda. So the Manda Amar says that you do not have to bring in Asher Me'ilos. It's because he holds like Rabbi Yehuda that even after Pesach, this chametz is going to be asur b'hana'ah. Manda Amar ma'al Reb Shimon, and the Manda Amar says that you do have to bring an Asher Me'ilos. He holds like Reb Shimon that in the future this hekdesh will have value and you'll be able to give it to the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore davar garim l'mamun k'mamun dami, and therefore right now we consider it as though it has value, and you'll have to bring an Asher Me'ilos. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Huda Amar Rabbi Yehuda yalav soor da'achila misoor de're'iyah. But I thought that Rav Acha Bar Yaakov says that Rabbi Yehuda learns out the soor of achila from the soor of re'iyah to say that you're allowed to eat the chametz of other people of gavoa, which means that it should have value, in which case you would be, meaning you're allowed to see the chametz of other people in shel gavoa, and therefore you would be mutar b'hana'ah other people, and then also in terms of if you get hana from, well, you'd be mutter for hana, let's say, on Pesach, if you say that we learn out achila from Re'iyah, you'd be allowed to eat and get benefit from the chametz of a non-Jew even on Pesach, because the Isser achila is only for yours. Now, in terms of hekdesh, you wouldn't be allowed to eat it because obviously it's hekdesh, but the point is that after Pesach, it would be mutter b'hana, and therefore it would be, you'd be allowed to be put onto money, give the money to the Beis Hamikdash and eat the bread. And therefore you should be chayev in Asham Me'ilos if you eat it on Pesach. But the fact that Rav Acha Bar Yaakov is saying that according to Rabbi Yehuda, you would be potter because it doesn't have any value, well then, Elohadu Be Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Mi'ahi means that Rav Acha Bar Yaakov retracted that assertion. And therefore, even Rav Acha Bar Yaakov would say that according to Rabbi Yehuda, Hametz, all chametz is aser ba'achila and aser ba'hana before Pesach, during Pesach, and after Pesach, whether that chametz belongs to a Jew, whether that chametz belongs to a non-Jew, whether that chametz belongs to hekdesh. Rav Ashi has an interesting opinion. He says, and this is the final opinion, says Rav Ashi, d'chuli ama ein podin. Okay, interesting. So Rav Ashi says, look, everyone would agree that if you say like Rabbi Yossi Aglili, that you're allowed to get benefit from chametz on Pesach, and therefore the question is regarding, are you allowed to be podeh the chametz so that you can, meaning you have this hekdesh chametz, can you be podeh it so you can feed it to your dogs, and therefore it would be considered like it has value? So we say no, you can't. Everyone agrees that you would not be allowed to be podeh hekdesh in order to feed it to your dog on Pesach. And if you hold like Reb Shimon, that in the future there's going to be value, even though right now it's also b'hana, we say no, that's irrelevant, and therefore right now it's valueless. Okay. Here, regarding Me'ila, it's the machlokas between Rabbi Yossi Aglili and the Chachamim. Manda Amar Ma'al Rabbi Yossi, Manda Amar L'Ma'al K'Rabbanan. Interesting. So Manda Amar who says that you have to bring an Asher Me'ilos, it's like Rabbi Yossi Aglili. And the Manda Amar who says that you don't have to bring an Asher Me'ilos, it's like the rabbis. What does this mean? So Rabbi Yossi Aglili says that Chametz is mutter ba'ana'ah on Pesach. And now, even though you would be unable to redeem this Chametz of hekdesh to feed it to your dog, however, we're saying that you would be allowed to be podeh the chametz of hekdesh onto money, and then use that chametz to for your own benefit, to burn under your pot, to make a fire to cook with. That would be allowed. And Rabbi Yossi Aglili says you're allowed to get hana from chametz on Pesach. So therefore, even though you wouldn't be allowed to be podeh this chametz of hekdesh to feed to your dog, yeah, that wouldn't be allowed. But you can use it for your own benefit. And therefore it has value, and therefore you can be chayiv in Asher Me'ilos if you eat it. Whereas according to the Chachamim, they say, like Reb Shimon, that that after Pesach, this chametz is going to be mutter b'hana, but on Pesach, it's also b'hana. And davar gorim l'mamun is lav k'mamun dami, therefore it has no value, and therefore you can be potter from an Asher Me'ilos. Very, very interesting. Okay, so now we get to an interesting discussion about mixtures of chametz. So let's say you have a little bit of chametz on Pesach. We're also going to talk about chametz after Pesach. So let's say if you have a mixture of chametz, right? So chametz gets mixed into some non-chametz. So what happens? Can you eat the mixture? Can you not eat the mixture? So there's going to be a distinction between if the chametz falls into similar chametz, right? So let's say, I don't know, what would even be an example of similar chametzes? I don't know. Maybe you have like a barley kernel or like a wheat berry that came in contact with water and somehow became chametz or something, and it gets mixed into a whole bunch of other wheat berries. So there would be a distinction between that and if it falls into barley berries, I don't know, whatever it is, right? A different species. So let's see. So Amar Rab, okay, so says Rab, chametz, okay, when it comes to chametz, bismano, so if it's on Pesach, bein b'mino, bein shelo b'mino, aser. Okay, so on Pesach, if you have a shtickle chametz, and it falls into anything, whether it falls into similar things, or whether it falls into dissimilar things, it's aser on Pesach. Shelo b'zmano. If it's after Pesach, B'mino asur, shelo b'mino mutter. Well, then if it falls into its own type, it's going to be a problem. If it falls into a different type, it's going to be permitted. What in the world are we talking about? Okay, if we're saying that it's talking about enough for this thing that fell in to impart flavor, well, shelo b'zmano, shelo b'mino mutter, hayav taima. But then, if it's imparting flavor, right, so then why are we saying that after Pesach, and of course right now the assumption being that after Pesach it's going to be Asr, like Rabbi Yehuda. So if you're assuming that after Pesach Hametz is Asr, well then, if there's enough of this Hametz to impart flavor, well then, how come it's going to be permitted to eat the mixture if the Hametz fell into She'eno Mino, something that is a different type, an imparted mixture, to make the whole mixture forbidden? So Ela b'mashu. Okay, so it must be talking about where it's just a tiny amount and it's not enough to impart flavor. Okay, so chametz bizmano, ben b'mino, ben shelo b'mino, aser. And we're saying that, well, I think maybe you can read it as a question. But if that's the case, if it's just a mashu, then why are we saying that chametz on Pesach, ben b'mino, ben shelo b'mino, aser? That chametz on Pesach, whether it falls into its own type, whether it falls into a different type, it's forbidden. But if we're saying that it's just the smallest amount, well, then I would think that if it falls into she'eno mino, it should be permitted. So like, what's going on over here? If it's enough to impart flavor, well then, how come we're saying that after Pesach, if it falls into a different species, be'eno mino, right? She'eno mino, so then it would be permitted, but it's no sin tam. It's imparting flavor, therefore it should be forbidden. And if it's just the tiniest amount, well, then how come we're saying that on Pesach it is forbidden b'she'eno mino? It should be permitted b'she'eno mino. So Rav l'taimei. Okay, so we say that Rav is consistent with his reasoning. To Rav Shmuel Damar Tarvayu, because Rav and Shmuel both say, listen to this. Kol yisurin shebatorah. So whenever it comes to like things that you're not allowed to eat, b'mino, b'mashu. Okay, so it's more stringent when it falls into a similar type. So if it's b'mino, if it falls into a similar type, then b'mashu. Even the smallest amount would make it forbidden to eat the mixture. Shelo b'mino, b'no sein tam. Now, if it falls into a different species, a different thing, well then it would have to be enough to impart flavor into that mixture. Okay, fine. So then the question is, how come on Pesach we're saying if the tiniest amount of chametz falls into a mixture, right, b'she'eno mino, why is he saying it's aser? I thought it should be permitted. Only b'no sin tam it becomes aser. Rav Gazar chametz bizmano shelo b'mino atomino. Now chametz on Pesach, when there's a chiyuv karis of eating chametz, so Rav makes a gezerah. He says on Pesach when eating chametz is a chiyuv karis, even if the chametz, which is just the tiniest amount, falls in b'she'eno mino, to a mixture that is of a different type, still it is going to be forbidden to eat that mixture, out of concern that when it falls into a similar type, right, so meaning when it falls into a similar type, it will be forbidden. Therefore, even when this tiniest amount falls into a dissimilar type, b'she'eno mino, it's going to be forbidden, so that you don't end up eating a mixture where a tiny bit fell into when it's all the same type. V'shelo b'zmano. Now, chametz after Pesach, where it's just a prohibition, but you're not chayav karis, well then you just relies on the default rules, which is b'mino aser Rabbi Yehuda. So, if the chametz falls into a similar type, it is going to be forbidden even by a mashu, and this is like Rabbi Yehuda, who says that chametz after Pesach is aser. V'shelo b'mino mutter. But if this little bit of chametz falls into a dissimilar type, well then it's mutter. It'll be permitted. Shelo b'zmano, v'shelo b'mino, atomino, kulei ha'lo gazrin. Because if it's after Pesach, when chametz is no longer chayiv kares, it's just a regular prohibition. Well then we can rely upon the default rules, which is that if this little bit of chametz falls into a different type, b'she'eno mino, so then it's going to be mutter. But if it falls into its own type, b'mino, well then the halacha is that it's going to be aser. Ushmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, Hametz bizmanu, Hametz on Pesach, b'mino asur, shelo b'mino mutter. Okay, if it falls into its own type, so then it's going to be forbidden. And if it falls into a different type, it's going to be permitted. Shelo bizmanu. Now, if you're talking about after Pesach, ben b'mino, ben shelo b'mino, mutter. Okay, then whether it falls into mino or not mino, it's going to be mutter, because he's going to be like Reb Shimon. He's holding like Reb Shimon, who says that after Pesach, chametz is mutter ba'ano. So chametz bizmano and ba'achila. Chametz bizmano b'mino asur. So when Shmuel says that chametz on Pesach, if it falls into b'mino, into its own type, so it's asur. Because Shmuel l'taimeh, Shmuel's in accordance with his opinion. The Rab u'Shmuel Damar Tavayu, because Rab and Shmuel both say, Kol Yisurin Shabbatorah b'mino asurin b'mashu, that all of the things in the Torah that are asur b'achila, so it's asur even if the smallest amount falls into its own type. Shelo b'mino, but if it falls into a different type, well then b'no sein tam, it would only be forbidden if it imparts flavor. But here we're talking about where just the tiniest amount fell in. So therefore, even on Pesach, when chametz is asur b'achila, and there's a chiyuv kares, still, the rule is, if it falls into its own type, it's asur. If it falls into a different type, it's permitted, since it's only the tiniest amount. Fine. Shelo b'minan, atuminan lo gazer. And we do not make a gezerah, right? Rav was concerned that, well, if you let people eat this tiny amount of chametz that falls into a shelo b'she'eno min b'she'eno mino, if you allow them to eat that, well then they might eat b'mino. Shmuel is not concerned about that, and therefore he says, look, we just stick to the rules on Pesach, even when chametz is asur b'achila, and there's a chiyuv kares, doesn't matter. If it falls into mino, so it's asur. If it falls into eno mino, it's mutter. Shelo b'zmano, now after Pesach, bein b'minon, bein shelo b'minon, mutar and Reb Shimon. Now after Pesach, he holds like Reb Shimon, who says that chametz she'avar alav Pesach is mutter ba'ano, and therefore we don't need to make any, and therefore there's nothing wrong with it. It's mutter ba'ano. So if the chametz falls into any kind of mixture, mino, eno mino, it's going to be permitted. Now, apparently, Rashi points out that the Gemara is going to ask, but didn't we say that according to Reb Shimon, you still can't eat it because of a knas? We'll get there. Reb Yochanan, and finally, Reb Yochanan Amar, chametz bizmano, so chametz on Pesach, bein b'mino, uven shelo b'mino, asur b'no sein tam. That chametz on Pesach, whether it falls into mino, whether it falls into eno mino, it's only going to be asur if it's no sein tam, if it imparts flavor. It's just a mashu, it's going to be mutter. Shelo b'zmano, and then after Pesach, bein b'minon, bein shelo b'minon, mutter. Then after Pesach, whether the chametz falls into its own type, whether it falls into a different type, it's going to be mutter. Because he goes like Reb Shimon, the chametz after Pesach is mutter. Chametz bizmano ben b'mino ben shelo b'mino b'no sein tam. So Rabbi Yochanan says that chametz on Pesach, whether it falls into its own type or a different type, it's going to be only a problem if it's b'no sein tam. Rabbi Yochanan l'taimeh. Rabbi Yochanan is consistent with his reasoning. To Rabbi Yochanan v'Rish Lakish Damar Tavayu, Kol Yisurin Shabbatorah bein b'minon bein shelo b'minon b'no sein tam. That anything that's asur ba'achila midoraisa is only a problem if it imparts flavor. But if it's just a mashu, so then whether it's b'minon, whether it's she'eno b'minon, it's going to be mutter. Shelo b'zmano. Now, if it's after Pesach, bein b'mino, bein shelo b'mino, mutarin, Reb Shimon. Well, if it's after Pesach, it's like Reb Shimon, who says that chametz she'avar alav Pesach is mutter ba'achila, mutter ba'ano, and therefore, whether it falls into minon, eno minon, it's going to be mutter, even if it's b'no sein tam, because it's permitted. That was the daf Chav Tes. It was kind of a packed daf. There was like a lot of stuff over there, but there was there's something to hold on to over here. So at the beginning, we had a machlokes between Rav Acha bar Yaakov and Rav about who's the author of our Mishnah, who says that chametz she'avar alav Pesach is asur if it's a Jew's chametz she'avar alav Pesach, but mutter if it's a nachri's. So Rav Acha bar Yaakov says it's Rabbi Yehuda, and he says that even though Rabbi Yehuda says that chametz she'avar alav Pesach is asur, that's only if it's yours. But if it belongs to a nachri, right, then it would be mutter. And even on Pesach, it would talk about mutter, because he compares achila to re'iyah, just like re'iyah is only yours, so achila is only yours. Rav says that the Mishnah is Taka Reb Shimon, who says that the Isser of Hametz is only on Pesach, but after Pesach it's mutter. So then, how come we're saying that you're not allowed to get Hana from the Hametz of a Yid Shavar Olav Pesach? I thought it's mutter after Pesach. We say, well, there's still a fine. We still fine this Yid for having stashed it in his house with him over Pesach, so therefore you still can't get benefit from it after Pesach as a fine. We got into this discussion about Me'ilah. Do you have to bring an Asham Me'ilos if you eat Hametz of hekdesh on Pesach? So the first way to understand it was to say that the opinion who says that you would not have to bring an Asham Me'ilos is Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana, who says that just like on Shabbos and on Yom Kippur, you do not need to pay for the pile of grain that you burnt because you're chayav, skila or karis. So here also you're chayav karis for eating the bread. Therefore, you don't have to worry about the Asham Me'ilos. We had the opinion of Rav Yosef, who says that it's like Rav Yossi Aglili, who says a chametz on Pesach is mutter ba'ana'ah. But now the question over here is, okay, can you be poded this bread so you could then feed it to your dog? In which case, there's something you can do with it, it has value. If you say that you could be poded to feed it to your dog, it has value, and therefore when you ate it, you are going to be taking from hekdesh, in which case you have to bring an Asham Me'ilos. If you say that you're unable to be poded hekdesh to feed it to your dogs, well then there's practically speaking, there's nothing you can do with it right now. Even though it's mutter ba'ana'ah, there's nothing you can actually do with it. You can eat it, you can be poded to feed it to your dogs. So therefore, it's not like you're taking anything away from hekdesh, and therefore you're gonna be pater from an Asham Me'ilos. Rav Acha bar Rava explains in the name of Yosef that actually it's like Reb Shimon, that right now on Pesach there is no value because it's also ba'ana'ah, but after Pesach it's going to be mutter ba'ana'ah, and you're going to be able to give it to the Beis HaMikdash. And therefore the question is, the fact that in the future it's going to have value, it's a davar gorm, the mamun k'mamun dami, is that significant? If you say that it therefore has value right now, so therefore you're going to be chayiv and Asham Me'ilos. If you say that it doesn't matter that it's going to have future value, it's valueless right now, you'll be pater from Asham Me'ilos. Rav Acha bar Yaakov says that it's actually the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. If you hold like Rabbi Yehuda that Chametz Shavar Olav Pesach is also ba'ana'ah, and that applies also to hekdesh, well then you don't have to bring it's valueless. You don't have to bring an Asham Me'ilos. If you hold like Reb Shimon that in the future it's going to have value, and you assume davar gorm the mamun is k'mamun dami, well then you will have to bring an Asham Me'ilos. And finally, Rav Ashi says that it's actually the machlokas between Rabbi Yossi Aglili and the Rabbanan. If you hold like Rabbi Yossi Aglili that chametz is mutter ba'ana'ah on Pesach, and interestingly, he would say even though you're not allowed to sell chametz, you're not allowed to be poded chametz to feed it to your dog, but you can poded the chametz to put it under your fire. Therefore, there's something you can do with it, and it has value, and therefore you'll be chayiv and Asham Me'ilos. Whereas according to the Chachamim, they say chametz is also ba'ana'ah on Pesach, and therefore there's nothing you can do with it, and therefore, right, davar gorm the mamun is lav k'mamun dami, and therefore you're going to be pater from a Asham Me'ilos. Then we discussed mixtures of chametz. This was kind of interesting, kind of technical, but kind of interesting. So Rav said that we're talking about a mixture of a mashu, right? That if a tiny bit of chametz falls into a mixture, and there's distinctions between during Pesach, after Pesach, if it's b'mino, b'she'eno mino. So on Pesach, if this little bit of chametz falls into a mixture, so whether the mixture is b'mino, whether the mixture is b'she'eno mino, it's going to be forbidden to eat this mixture, because in general, b'mino is not, right? If you have a mashu that falls b'mino, it's asur, but we generally say that a mashu that falls b'she'eno mino would be mutter. However, Rava makes a gzeira that since on Pesach eating chametz is a isur, a chiyuv kares, so we make a gzeira and we say, you know what, even if the mashu falls into b'she'eno mino, don't eat it out of concern that you might end up eating when it falls into mino. Now after Pesach, however, he holds like Rabbi Yehuda that Chametz Shavar Olav Pesach is asur, but in this case he's just going to rely on the default rules, which is that if it falls into b'mino, it's going to be asur, b'she'eno mino, it's going to be mutter. Shmuel says, first of all, like Reb Shimon, that after Pesach, chametz is mutter ba'ana'ah. So therefore, forget it, mino, eno mino, it doesn't matter, it's going to be mutter. On Pesach, however, he just simply relies on the default rules, which means that if this little bit of chametz falls b'mino, it's going to be asur. If it falls b'she'eino mino, it's going to be mutter. Says Rabbi Yochanan, also like Rabbi Shimon, that after Pesach there's nothing to worry about because chametz she'avar lava Pesach is mutter ba'ana. So whether it's b'mino, b'she'eino mino, it's going to be mutter. But on Pesach, however, he says whether the chametz falls b'mino, whether it falls b'she'eino mino, it's only going to be also if it's b'nosein tam, if it imparts flavor. If it doesn't impart flavor, it's going to be permitted. That was the Daf Chavtes. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.